The Louisville Cardinals must turn the season around with a win over Virginia on Saturday.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome in to this new episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I want to take this time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. All you have to do, visit FanDuel.com to get started. Louisville has lost their last 2 games. They now travel to Charlottesville with a Saturday matchup against the Virginia Cavaliers. Louisville must turn around the season with a win over Virginia on Saturday. We'll identify the keys to victory, how Louisville can contain Anthony Colandrea, what they need to do offensively. We'll also identify the players to watch for the Louisville Cardinals, 2 offensive, 2 defensive. That topic coming up at the end of the show. But simply put, when we discuss what is at stake here for the Louisville Cardinals, something that I like to discuss before we really dive deep into the preview of a certain matchup, because I feel like it gives us the rightful context that we need to, have in place to really understand what is at stake in this matchup. And I keep coming back to one point, and that is that Louisville has to turn the season around this weekend. Like, there's no better time to do so. And the only way to do that is defeating Tony Elliott's squad over the weekend. There's no other way. Like, Louisville has to win this game if they have hopes to turn the season around. Now, if you want to play the technical aspect of things, they could lose, but then you're staring down the schedule. You have Miami next week. You've got a Friday night road game at Boston College against a tough quarterback. You're on the road at Clemson. You see where I'm getting at? It's like the more and more you lose, the less and less error that you have at your disposal to be able to have and still have what's classified as a good season. Now, at this point, I feel like our expectations were sky high for this team. And even after how last season ended, rightfully so, it felt like these expectations were justified. It's been a long week of reflecting. You come back to this notion that you are as good as your record says you are. And I really like that, because you really can't argue with the record. Yeah, the shoulda, coulda, woulda aspect of it, that's great. But it doesn't matter. That is not reflected in the win-loss column. And if Louisville wants to turn this season around, and look, it's technically early. Like, this is the last game of the first half of the schedule. So it's you still have to play these games and play to win the game. So Louisville could go on a second half run. But I think you put yourself in a much better position by beating Virginia on Saturday than obviously losing to them. Losing to SMU is one thing. I think SMU is a better team than Virginia, even though the Cavaliers have a very similar record. I do think that SMU is a better team. It still doesn't take away the fact that Louisville really hurt themselves in that game. Credit to the Mustangs, though. The Pony Bros played really, really well. No taking away credit from them. You lost to Notre Dame. You've got 2 losses. You're 3-2 on the season with one of the most talented teams in the past decade of this football program. If you win, really the only thing that you have to show for it, and this is significant, don't get me wrong, is you put a win in the win column. Like, just because you beat Virginia doesn't mean that everything is fixed and that everything goes back to normal and everything's okay and that everything is just roses and daisies. That it's not that simple. This is not really a 1-week turnaround. This is a get-right game, which Louisville can stop the slide. They can turn the ship around and start going in the right direction. Because one thing you don't want to happen is to be 3-3 after this week And then you have to play Miami at home against Cam Ward, who very well may be at this point, I don't know about the Heisman frontrunner, but he's definitely top 3 in the conversation at this moment. They're undefeated. Now, Miami's won in some very weird, unorthodox ways, but they are wins. This is going to be arguably, what is Miami ranked at the current moment? Number 6. They have, of course, they've got a bye week before Louisville, so they're not going to fall in the standings. At the very worst, you would assume that this is the number 6 team in the country coming to Louisville next week. You don't want to put yourself in a situation to where you're putting yourself on a slippery slope to fighting for bowl eligibility. Because you lose to Virginia. Let's play the hypothetical here. Let's say you lose to Virginia. You're at 3 losses. You're not going to be favored against Miami. Right now, it's hard to believe that that's a win. On the road at Clemson has always felt like a loss. It even more so does now. Then you have Kentucky. And right now, their strength, which is their defense and their defensive line, is looking like it's going to dominate the line of scrimmage like it's done for the past 5 years or so. It's not going to be easy. That's why you have to win the games that you're supposed to win. That's why you needed to beat SMU. That's why you cannot afford to lose to Virginia, because you lose to Virginia, then you look at those and say, okay, let's say you lose to Clemson and Miami. Kentucky, I know a lot of Louisville fans say, yeah, we can beat Kentucky. And I agree, you can beat Kentucky, but will use the main question. And at this point, with the way both teams are trending, it feels like Kentucky would be favored in that game. So if you're hypothetically saying that you lose all 3 of those games, then you're going to have to win out the rest of the schedule to even be bowl eligible. That is such a different conversation than what we were having just 2 weeks ago. But you've put yourself in a situation where you can't afford to lose any other game outside of those 3. You can't. You lost to Notre Dame. Maybe you weren't favored, but it's still a loss. You lost to SMU, a team that you were supposed to beat. And if you lose to Virginia, another team that you're supposed to beat, well, what happens when you play the teams you're not projected to beat? I know I'm getting frustrated here. I'm really getting frustrated here because this team is way too talented. And we talked all week about what needs to change, how Jeff Brom needs to adjust his coaching, how the defensive coaching needs to make corrections, how Louisville needs to fix this and fix that. At this point, it's over with the talk, and it's about putting that into effect, because these season-long questions that we've been asking are continuing to not answer themselves week by week. Things we were asking against Jacksonville State were things that we were asking against SMU. You have to turn things around here. Like, this is, we had a mailbag question, or a buy-sell segment yesterday about how Virginia, isn't the most pivotal week of the season because, you don't want to be prisoner of the moment. You want to think of things, from a large, broad, focus here, zoomed out a little bit. But the truth is, this is like the game. If you lose to SMU, it's not the end of the world, although you put yourself in a tough situation. But because you beat SMU, this game becomes truly a must-win. I look back to 2022. It's weird how parallel these situations are. Not exactly, but they are similar. 2022, Scott Satterfield ended up losing some early games. Syracuse, Florida State, Boston College, some teams that you definitely should have defeated. And it looked like that seat was so hot you couldn't even sit down. And it felt like if Louisville were to have lost to Virginia that year on the road, he might have been fired midseason. It seemed like that would have sealed his fate. Louisville ended up winning that game on the road. And it completely started the momentum shift that Louisville needed to then beat Wake Forest, beat NC State, beat James Madison, beat Pittsburgh, they won all these games. They went on a streak to the end of the year to the point to where it saved Scott Satterfield's job. Now, maybe recruiting at a high level had some, impact on it. But if Scott Satterfield wouldn't have left on his own, his job was saved for the next season. He bought himself another year by starting to turn the ship around against Virginia. Now, I'm not naive enough to know that it wasn't just the Virginia game that got him his job saved, but that's where it started. And I'm not saying that Jeff Brom's on the hot seat because he's not even close to it. The seat's not even lukewarm. But for the season, this is a game that you're supposed to win by about a touchdown. And if you can flip the script, man, who knows, right? Who knows? But you put yourself in a situation to where you're not back against the wall every single week just fighting for bowl eligibility. So that's why I'm saying that Louisville must turn around the season with a win this weekend against the Virginia Cavaliers. Well, how are they going to do that? Well, the first large key is going to make sure that you contain Anthony Colandrea. We'll discuss when we come back on today's episode of Locked on Louisville. Today's episode is brought to you by Z-Biotics. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your next rough day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break down this byproduct down. Every time I have pre-alcohol before drinks, I notice a difference the next day. Even after a night out, I can confidently plan on not having a huge headache the next day without worry. I won't lie, I was a bit on the fence about pre-alcohol initially, but then while hanging out with some buddies over at one of our friends to watch the games, I gave it a shot. And believe me, it is the real deal. Here's how to use. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol. Step 2, drink responsibly. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. It's backed with 100% money back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/lockedon and use the code LockedOnCollege at checkout for 15% off. While I have your attention, I also want to tell you about the great opportunities with our title sponsor of the show, FanDuel. You can start the season out with a large return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. If you go to FanDuel.com, you'll see that Louisville's about a touchdown favorite over Virginia. Check out all the player props on FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. And Cardinal fans, I want to take this time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked on Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Tomorrow is game day. Louisville, Virginia, 3:30 kickoff in Charlottesville. The Cardinals looking to snap a 2-game losing streak. How are they going to do that? 3 keys to victory. I mentioned it before we went to break. I'm going to reiterate it. You have to contain Anthony Colandrea. If you remember last year, Louisville's defense they were really, really good. They were getting after the quarterback. They were pitching shutouts. They weren't allowing many scores in the first half. I mean, they were dominant. And then a 2-win Virginia squad comes to Louisville on a Thursday night. A freshman quarterback runs rampant. Star receivers create busted coverage in the Louisville defense, and the Cavaliers gave the ranked Louisville Cardinals everything that they could handle. Now, thankfully, Louisville was able to overcome this adversity and be victorious in the outcome, but it didn't take away the fact that Virginia laid out the blueprint on both sides of the football on how to defeat the Louisville Cardinals. Fast forward about a year, maybe 10 months or so, and you see that you're going up against the Virginia team with a lot of the same key pieces like quarterback Anthony Colandrea, who is in his sophomore season, the 6-foot native of St. Petersburg, Florida. Do want to take this time. I didn't realize that he was from St. Petersburg, but we're going to take this time to send our thoughts and prayers to those in the path of Hurricane Milton, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Fort Myers, Sarasota, all those affected. Our thoughts go out to you. Please help out if you can. And we wish everyone the best as they deal moving forward with the aftermath of Hurricane Milton. Anthony Colandrea, I wouldn't necessarily classify as a dual threat quarterback. I mean, last year he ran for 225 yards, no touchdowns. He was partially the starter here and there. This year, 49 carries for 158 yards. I mean, he's still averaging about 3 yards per carry. He's got 2 touchdowns. So he's not a dual threat quarterback. And sack yardage is obviously put into that category, factored into the rushing statistics. But Louisville has just not shown that they can defend quarterbacks that even slightly can get out and run. Now, he's not a dual threat quarterback who's known for getting up out of the pocket like Tyler Huff or Haynes King or Riley Leonard or Kevin Jennings. So the last 4 quarterbacks that you've played, they're all known for extending drives with their legs, and that's a big portion of their game. Now, Colandrea isn't necessarily to that level, but don't forget what he did to your team last year. That has to be looked at, because if he did it last year, he can do it again. Here's the thing. He had 14 carries for 89 yards against the Cardinals. It was a 100% a season high, not even close. Duke, after that, he had 66. But even with sack yardage involved, he got sacked 4 times. He still had 89 yards on the ground. That was a true damning testament to how bad Louisville was at contain. And they've shown that that's been an issue this year. So the number one key to the game for Louisville's, especially on the defense, what it is on the defense side, containing Anthony Colandrea. He is top 50 in passing yards per game. He's been fairly respectable. He's cutting down on the turnovers, or for the most part. I mean, he's only got 4 interceptions, but coupled that with 8 touchdowns. I mean, his quarterback rating is 52.6. So he's not setting the world on fire, but what he's doing is respectable. Virginia, even with the weaker schedule that they have, they're still 4-1. They're better than they were last year. Defense is better than they were last year. Still leads us into the next point. One thing that they haven't really been all that great at is passing defense. They're 118th nationally, allowing about 266.4 yards per game to opposing quarterbacks. The main thing here, key number 2, protect Tyler Shough. Offensive line play has been spotty over the past couple of weeks. Monroe Mills going down with injury doesn't help. Right tackle has been an issue. The interior's been, I would say, fine, but you have to be good. The offensive line has to be better all across the board, and they have to get better play on the boundaries at the tackle spot, because if you give Tyler Shough time to throw, Virginia's shown you that they are pretty susceptible in the passing defensive side of things. So protecting Tyler Shough will work wonders for opening up the passing game for Ja'Cory Brooks, for Caullin Lacy, for the tight ends, for Isaac Brown, all across the board. The third key, I do want to make it aware that I try not to repeat the same keys to the game, keys to victory, because it kind of gets lazy, it feels like. But containing a mobile quarterback and protecting your quarterback have been like the 2 main issues. This third one is sort of really case specific. It's getting into the red zone offensively. That has been sort of an issue with Louisville, is that they've been able to get to midfield, but they've sort of stalled out, either sacks or penalties. But the 2 losses to Notre Dame and SMU, or situational play calling, the 2 losses to Notre Dame and SMU, one thing that hurt the Cardinals offensively was they would get past midfield, but they wouldn't get close enough. They'd get stuck in no man's land around the 40, where it's, do you trust Brock Travelstead's leg in this situation? Are you close enough to go for it? They've been putting themselves into tough situations. When you get yourself into the red zone, you're going to put yourself in a good position to succeed, especially against this opponent. Virginia is 115th nationally in red zone defense. They're allowing 94% of scores in red zone tries. They've given up 18, or there's been 18 defensive possessions in the red zone for Virginia. 9 of those ended with a touchdown for the opposing offense, 8 for a field goal. So 17 of the 18 have ended in scores. They are literally the worst team in the ACC, one of the worst Power 4 conference squads when it comes to red zone defense. So that is the third key here, is getting into the red zone, because once you do, chances are you're going to have a high level of success, which Louisville usually does when they get around the 20-yard line. So contain Anthony Colandrea, protect Tyler Shough, and get into the red zone. Those are the 3 keys to game here for me. When you talk about players to watch for, it's all over the place, right? But it's time for Caullin Lacy to have a breakout game for the Louisville Cardinals. We'll discuss when we come back on today's episode of Locked on Louisville. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get to the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5 APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. While you're hearing about great opportunities, let me tell you about our friends over at Home Field Apparel. I know that the graphic says to get ready for the season, but the season's about halfway through. Still, Home Field Apparel is the place to get all of your vintage college sports clothing. Home Field is a premium collegiate apparel brand based in Indianapolis. They have a focus on creating incredibly comfortable, officially licensed apparel with vintage college designs. They have a wide range of available colleges, 180 and growing, including your Louisville Cardinals. The Can't Miss Kickoff 2024 is a month-long campaign delivering everything needed for the football season, from football boxes, coaches' jackets, bomber jackets, Champs Week, and much, much more. The football box contains 3 never-before-seen items for your school that are not available anywhere else, curated so fans have new gear to wear all season long. Home Field has been my go-to for all Louisville Cardinals gear. If you go to homefieldapparel.com, you can see all their options available. It's convenient. It's online shopping, so you know it's convenient. Go to Home Field, homefieldapparel.com, to find all of your favorite Louisville Cardinal apparel. And into the final segment of this Virginia pregame episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. It's been a tough week. It's been a tough week of soul searching, having extremely difficult conversations. Let's talk about 4 players, 2 offensive, 2 defensive, that Louisville needs to step up against Virginia. The first one we already mentioned, and that is Caullin Lacy. Caullin Lacy just made his season debut a couple weeks ago against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. He had a pretty respectable game, 5 for 71. This past game, however, 2 catches for 1 yard, 2 carries for 10 yards. It wasn't really the greatest game for the South Alabama transfer. The 5'10" native of Mobile, Alabama, was one of the best yards after catch guys in the country last season. It has to be a point of focus to get him the ball in space and just to let him go, man. Get him the opportunities, get him the targets, because I think that Louisville needs, and Caullin Lacy is due for a vintage Caullin Lacy breakout game that includes a plethora of catches, some big yardage gains. Now, of course, Ja'Cory Brooks is going to be factored into the conversation, but I also think that if Caullin Lacy is able to bust onto the scene with a big performance, I think it spells great things for this Louisville offensive line moving forward, or for this Louisville offense as a whole moving forward. That kind of leads me into the next player that we're going to watch for on the offensive side. I'm going to go with two different ones. Jonathan Mendoza / Rashid Miller. Louisville's right tackle play last week was the lowest graded amongst the offensive players eligible. They both played over 40 snaps, and the grades were under 40 for both individuals. They have to be better as it relates to creating holes, to not getting penalties, and to protecting the quarterback Tyler Shough, because if Louisville's offense wants to fire on all cylinders, Tyler Shough has to be protected. They got to have gaps for the running backs to run through, and you have to have the time for Tyler to throw the football. So it's the right tackle play here are the two players to watch. I guess I'm going to cheat here and say that there should be 5 players to watch because there are 2 players in the right tackle spot. But I'm going to say whoever is starting at right tackle is the player to watch, because that has been a recurring issue for the Cardinals all season long. You transition over to the defensive side of the football. It's been definitely a rough year for the Cardinals. I think the first one that I'm going to go with is Stanquan Clark. Linebacker play has been sort of up and down. Stanquan Clark leads the team with 31 tackles, 4 more than TJ Quinn, who's second on the squad. I think that as it relates to making sure Anthony Colandrea doesn't get out and run the football, just doing a good job of tackling in space. I need to see Louisville's linebacker room continue to improve, and that's one of the spots that you just have to continue to get better and better. So the linebacker room is really key, and Stanquan Clark is the first defensive player to watch for. On the other side of things, or on the defensive line, it's pretty weird because Ashton Gelati is being thrown to the interior, obviously, to give NFL scouts more film on him on the interior. Regardless, there has to be someone stepping up on the other side of Gelati when he is on the outside. And I'm going to go with Tramel Logan, the South Florida transfer. Had a really good start against Austin Peay, but it was against the worst team that you will play. Since then, it's been, he had a good game against Georgia Tech. He had 7 tackles, but only 1 against Notre Dame, only 1 against SMU. You need him to take the next step forward. You need him to get into the opposing backfield and make life tough for Tony Elliott's quarterback and for the Virginia running backs. Louisville desperately needs someone to step up in the pass rush. This is where the loss of Mason Reiger is proving to be very costly. You need someone to step up on the other side to be able to take some of that pressure off Ashton Gelati. So a lot of players to watch for in this matchup, but nonetheless, this is a must turnaround type situation for the Louisville football season. We'll be back to break down, hopefully, what is going to be a Louisville win here in a couple of days. That is going to wrap up this Friday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here very soon.